protocol. I will now declare open the first voting session. You have until 10:45 to vote. The voting results will be announced at 1:30. Now, for 2 minutes, I give the floor to Nicolas Bay on behalf of ID.
Merci, Madame la
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, the fact that the latest negotiations may reach an agreement or a provisional agreement which makes our Parliament into an echo box for decisions taken elsewhere is the outcome of the decision taken 4.5 hours by the people of the UK. The original sin was the contempt Brussels showed to the British people when they expressed their vote by absolute majority in a referendum. In the logic of integration of the EU, everything was meant to keep expanding and enlarging rather than allowing a country to leave the EU properly. And then you negotiated an agreement which you knew was going to be unacceptable for the House of Commons or the British people. And obviously saying that the text was enshrined and incapable of even the slightest amendment means that you were forcing the British to make their choice. And here in Brussels, people were quite happy to override democracy in the vote of 2016. The government of Boris Johnson got rid of the initial text after their elections, more wasted time. And now what will cost us dearly in the next few days was to tackle the most litigious and delicate points later on. When it comes to fair competition, the idea of the Court of Justice ruling was one of the reasons they left the EU. And today the Union is negotiating FTAs with the whole world, and it's giving tax advantages and financial and economic advantages for the countries capable of the most criticism, such as Turkey and Pakistan. But we wouldn't put in place a reasonable, fair trade agreement with a country like the UK. Another problem is the fisheries, a fundamental problem. Well, let's hope that the interests of the Netherlands, Denmark and France are not sacrificed because Brussels doesn't see an interest or a key issue there. And lastly, it's in our interest to have a quality agreement with the UK and to avoid prophesying doom and gloom. The plagues on Egypt if Brexit goes through. The majority voted for Boris Johnson. Nothing like that happened. Democracy was founded in Europe by our civilization. The UK decided to leave because Brussels has often forgotten democracy.
Thank you very much. And now for the Green Group, Philip Lambers for 3 minutes.
Madame la Présidente, chers collègues, je me
Madam President, colleagues, I am very happy to see that, as narrow as it is, there is a path to an agreement between the EU and the UK. And I would like to thank the teams led by Michel Barnier and their desire to preserve the integrity of the internal market. Perhaps they will come up with a trade agreement will allow us to move towards social and environmental standards that are higher rather than a race to the bottom. But colleagues, I do have to say that I am outraged by the position taken by the president of our groups in the Parliament, who said that we have to ratify an agreement in just a few days after the merest glance at this text. I am a member of the European Parliament, and I often hear colleagues complaining about the lack of respect towards our Parliament from the Commission and Council. Sometimes these complaints are justified. But if you want the respect of others, you have to first of all respect yourself. And our actions yesterday makes the Parliament look ridiculous. How do you think that such a large and unprecedentedly important agreement can be looked at in just a couple of days when we haven't even seen the first paragraph yet? Regardless of how much trust and confidence we have in our negotiators, what we're talking about here is respect for procedures, respect for our legislatory authority, checks and balances, which are required in any democracy. We're trying to speed through an agreement to this, and even if we have mechanisms in the Parliament and will be able to ratify the treaties that are proposed to them, even at the last minute, it's the speed that's caused by the ratification procedure. The Commission is the executive. It has to be subject to democratic scrutiny. The officials who are writing this treaty are operating as they wish. We have to be able to verify how far the final texts are in line with the mandate we gave. This kind of behaviour leads always to abuses of power. If there was to be temporary application of the treaties, that would at least preserve Parliament's role. It would as well give Parliament time to properly scrutinise. There's nothing that stops two consenting parties to prolong the status quo in their relationships for an extra month or two. Colleagues, from one side of the EU to another, parliaments are all too often treated as merely rubber stamps. The European Parliament can't, under its own initiative, add its name to this list. It's absolutely ridiculous that we've just carried out this very difficult and successful battle about the European budget, about conditionality for European subsidies on the rule of law. I think we have to ensure that we show respect for ourselves.
Thank you very much. And now for the Conservative and Reformist Group for 3 minutes, Kian Epping.
Madam President, we have come a long way, but now is the time to close the deal. History would be harsh on both the European Union and the United Kingdom if we fail on the ultimate stretch. My group, ECR, wants a deal. We have always been very close to the British, in particular the Conservative Party. British Conservatives were co-founders of our group. They offered us professionalism, pragmatism and a sense of humour. In the Conservative Party, an understatement is an expression of survival, since your opponent within is never far away, basically behind you. However, that party also produced historical leaders like Winston Churchill and Margaret Thatcher, with the power of strong personalities. Since the British have left, the European Parliament has become more boring, if I may say. And without Nigel Farage over there in the corner, rather quiet, like a provincial assembly. But Mr. Farage has found other topics to play the naughty boy of Britain. Without the British, the right to dissent seems to disappear from this Parliament, unfortunately. There is a mounting pressure for la pensée unique. Open debates and conflicting arguments, however, are ways to test ideas to reality. Too many narratives in this chamber remain in a void of self-complacency, missing the much-needed reality check. Without the British, the European Parliament tends to become a kind of religious congregation, mainly convinced of itself. We have to look for ways to keep these qualities the British have brought to this Parliament, in which, ironically, English remains the main language of communication without interpretation. The Brexit negotiations have also shown cultural differences. The French always have une logique and a big design. The British rather proceed case by case, picking the cases that serve them best, as Mr. Barnier may have noticed. I thank both Mr. Barnier, Mr. Šefčovič and Mr. Frost, including their teams, for all the efforts to find common ground from different positions. Madam President, we have to close the deal. The Parliament should not resort to grandstanding. Regarding a possible agreement, it's simply yes or no. Political groups should work on a resolution up for debate here in Brussels. The vote could be carried out by remote, a useful practicality we have mastered in this eventful year. Let us establish a parliamentary EP UK delegation to remain in dialogue and to meet old friends in a new era. Thank you.
Now I give the floor for the GUE group to Martin Shirdevan for 2.5 minutes.
Vielen Dank, Frau Präsidentin.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll start with the good news. Firstly, today we are opening the path to emergency aid and measures if there's no deal, a good sign for workers and their companies in the European Union and a good signal for the European fisheries industry. However, I'd also like to propose, Commissioner, that if there is serious economic disruption, we reconsider the European Investment Bank being tasked with setting up a fund in particular to help out small and medium-sized enterprises deal with those serious consequences and support them. Secondly, I welcome the progress made in negotiations on the implementation and application of the withdrawal agreement under the Withdrawal Treaty and the Irish Protocol that the Commissioner spoke about. To remind us all, complete implementation is not just the prerequisite for securing peace in Ireland, but it's also the precondition for this Parliament voting for an agreement, a treaty at all. Mr. Barnier, we are now at a crossroads in the negotiations, and if in the next hours an agreement emerges, then I and my group will face the task of deciding how we stand on such an agreement. Do we vote for it, or given the substance, do we veto it? And the Commission has come forward with the announcement that this agreement will be the first of a new generation of trade agreements, namely a fair trade agreement, and we will measure the Commission by just that, because as the left in the European Parliament, for many years we've campaigned for a new generation of trade agreements, namely agreements that deal with social affairs, employment, environment, human rights and consumer protection, with a strong answer not just for the EU but also trading partners. But the problem is that we don't have any more time really to scrutinise thoroughly in Parliament any such agreement or to conduct democratic debate with ourselves and the European public. But that's precisely our job as MEPs. That's precisely our work in the interest of the Europeans, and it's completely unacceptable that thus far we haven't had any insight, at least into the texts. Mr. Barnier, I wish you over the next few hours a conclusion to the negotiations, not least because that will give us a little more time to read the texts thoroughly. And to the British government, I would like to say, moved, please.
Thank you very much. And now for the non-affiliated members, Vice President Castaldo for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, the 31st of December is getting closer, and according to the agreement from last January, that is when the agreement on the future of trade relations between the UK and the EU should be concluded. This is a period of pandemic as well, and it should have pushed the British government to accept an extension to the negotiations, which would have been more opportune. However, we can't allow the clearly defined principles to be undermined. Above all, we can't allow any exemptions or steps backwards when it comes to the level playing field. It's fundamental if it's going to allow equal access to the single market. We will not lower our standards. We don't want to see any unfair competition towards our businesses, which are already in trouble because of the pandemic. We don't want to see any form of social dumping. It's entirely unacceptable, and we would reject that as strongly as we could. We want to continue to work to the very final moment, but only to get a good agreement, but not at any cost, and not at any price. Thank you.
And now for 2 minutes, Christoph Hansen is next.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Cher Michel, dear Minister Vice President. As we go down the wire today, we meet again, still no wiser to the outcome of the negotiations on the future partnership.
And let me assure you, everybody is fed up with waiting for Godot. But if this Parliament has shown flexibility, it is because Michel Barnier, the UK task force and Maros Sefcovic have gone above and beyond to keep Parliament and Council abreast at every twist and every turn of these negotiations. It is because it was not our negotiators who refused to extend the transition period, Mr. Lamberts. It is because the UK is running down the clock. It is because we have the historic responsibility to shield people and businesses as well as possible from the historic lack of responsibility the UK government is showing. With today's contingency votes, we show that we are not putting all our eggs in the same Brexit basket. We must be prepared for every eventuality, protecting those who would fall deepest off the famous cliff edge that seems inevitable without a deal this weekend. Ladies and gentlemen, a no-deal Brexit would be a serious failure of statecraft and hit citizens and businesses in the most brutal manner. Therefore, I call one last time on Prime Minister Johnson. Embrace this weekend's ultimate chance to give priority to citizens over political cynicism. We owe this to our current and future negotiations. Our hand remains extended. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hansen. And now for 2.5 minutes, Vice President Silva Pereira.
Thank you, Chair. We are running out of time. Negotiations are progressing, divergences remain, and in the meantime, the transition period is about to end. Citizens are worried, businesses are nervous with all this uncertainty, and we have to ask ourselves, why are we in this terrible situation? For two reasons, really. The first one is that Prime Minister Boris Johnson always refused even to consider an extension of the transition period. He knew that to conclude these difficult negotiations in such a short period of time would be unprecedented. He knew that back in June, when an assessment was made, progress was far from sufficient. He also knew the dramatic consequences of COVID-19 in our negotiations and the fact that we are facing the worst recession since World War II. But even so, he always refused to consider an extension of the transition period. Second reason why we are where we are, because the UK government is taking endless time to realize that some illusions of Brexit simply cannot be delivered. Yes, the UK is a sovereign country, entitled to take back control of the laws, the borders and waters. Nobody in the EU is denying that. But we have to recall that we are just having this conversation because the UK, despite being out of the EU, the single market and the customs union, wants to maintain access to the European market with zero tariffs and zero quotas. And the EU answers, okay, we are ready to go that far if you ensure fair competition. So this is no punishment. This is not about regulatory freedom. This is a deal, a fair deal. Michel Barnier, Maros Sefcovic, we thank you, we support you, and we are sure that as soon as the British government understands reality, the negotiations will reach a positive outcome, meaning that reality in this case is very simple. An ambitious agreement can only be reached if fair competition is ensured, if a common level playing field in a credible manner is ensured for the future relationship. Thank you.
Much. Thank you. And now for 1.5 minutes, Morten Peterson.
Tak, formand.
Thank you very much, Madam President. So we've now reached the absolute end phase of a rather tragic period of time. The UK want to leave, and the Brits themselves have established this end date, the end of this year, not the EU. And this chaotic process is one long example of how a poor decision can lead to many other poor decisions. If one mistake is committed, it is easy that many other errors follow on its heels. We've seen that the British Conservative policy has become an issue to affect the whole of the EU. Unfortunately, many people in agriculture and fisheries and in industry are risking losing their jobs because of Brexit. The EU has accommodated the UK's demands to a long degree, and I think we need to pay tribute to Mr. Barnier for his patience, but it has to be our good English friends themselves who decide if they want to carry on trading with us or not. We cannot and must not forge compromises against the interests of the single market. It's inappropriate that British firms should have access to the single market in Europe and at the same time prevent us and our companies from having access, because that would be unfair competition. We will do our utmost to get a fair agreement at the last minute, but it has to be fair for both parties.
Thank you very much. And now for 2 minutes, Marco Campomenosi.
Thank you, President, Vice President Šefčovič and Negotiator Mr. Barnier, who's had to leave the room. Thank you both. In my previous experience, I've learnt a great number of things. My father had a small business, and he taught me that customers were always right, and that if anyone went to buy things from him, then he shouldn't treat them with a slap in the face. Now, some in this chamber have caused us to lose many months of tight negotiating time. I know how complex international trade agreements are. It's the 18th of December today, and I think it's down to the fact that the UK hasn't been able to reach a trade agreement with the USA that we should be grateful for. They might have replaced some of the goods that normally come from our single market to them, had they done so. Now, some have said that there's not been much transparency, and some political groups have been shut out of the flow of information completely. That's the way things happen. That's the way things happen in other trade negotiations. But one of the problems that our friends on the International Trade Committee will know very well, this is a problem that applies today and will apply in the future. I don't agree with those who complain about the level of standards of the UK, because it will be a country that the European Parliament will realise when it's concluded agreements with Asian countries that don't respect environmental and worker standards, that we haven't suspended Turkey from the customs union. I think it will be a little hypocritical to raise such aspects in this process. And let's think about the European companies and workers and try and understand the lessons that have been passed down to us by Brexit.
And now for 1.5 minutes, Gwendolyn Delbos-Caulfield.
We are at the 11th hour of the negotiation. Significant progress has been made on the Northern Ireland Protocol, on citizens' rights, and on the level playing field. Ensuring peace and a diplomatic link with Northern Ireland seems now possible. Ensuring there are standards, high democratic, environmental, social standards in our trading and cooperation with the UK is still a priority, but time is ticking. And we no longer have the possibility for scrutiny before the 31st of December. we cannot fulfill our duty as member of this Parliament. And running down the clock should not be an effective negotiation tactic. We are seriously endangering our future relationship with the UK if we accept a last-minute deal and if we submit ourselves to this shameful UK government strategy of delaying talks since 1 year. There cannot be blind trust. We are here to protect the rights of the citizens, both in the EU and the UK. Let's take the example of the data protection. We already know that Facebook is planning to shift oversight of data belonging to British users from Ireland to USI. And once again, this UK government has a very problematic record on the data protection aspect. So we cannot sign an agreement with them, an adequacy agreement, with no further scrutiny. We need at least a technical extension, a 6-week minimum scrutiny period written in any deal that would be made. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The floor now goes to Gert Bourgeois for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'd like to start by thanking Vice President Šefčovič on the concluding the agreements and making it operational, the withdrawal agreement. We understand that Mr. Barnier had to leave us. That's understandable. I'd like to thank him for the massive effort he's put in. A lot of patience, good resolution as well, with the necessary pragmatism and flexibility as well. My question then is, everything ought to be done in the last days, the last hours, to try and reach an agreement. Because the consequences of a no deal, ladies and gentlemen, are horrendous. For the European Union, we would lose 1.2 million jobs. And this would come over and above the disaster of Corona. The UK would lose more than 500,000 jobs. In Flanders, we would lose 2.6 of our GDP and 30,000 jobs. So I'd like to ask the Commission to do some rapid work on the Brexit fund to make sure that those regions and sectors that are hit hardest to be covered. If we can counterbalance or compensate for the downsides of Brexit, maybe we can have some new trade agreements that are absolutely necessary. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, that it must be possible to reach an agreement with pragmatism and flexibility to find a balance between the sovereignty of the Brits and the integrity of our single market that they have to respect. Mechanisms for state aids, for competition, for maintaining our standards, for governance, and also for fisheries, where we recognise sovereignty, but there's a question of sufficient access, sufficient quotas, but also legal certainty for our fishers. I can endorse what Mr. Barnier said, that we need to reflect on the future, that we have to push for a post-Brexit partnership, not just in terms of defence and security, but also in terms of research and development, but also Erasmus+, but also when it comes to university cooperation, and in and around the North Sea for the blue economy. The 21st century will be the century of the oceans. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, we need to put together an interparliamentary cooperation body for working with the UK after Brexit. We need to draw the lessons from Brexit. This is not something that we should see repeated, this terrible situation. Article 50 needs to be reviewed. I hope it will never be applied again. But if you want to leave, there should be a blueprint for that. We should be able to counteract populism. We have to deliver when it comes to jobs, internal market and welfare, when it comes to trade agreements and a balanced migration policy.
The floor goes for 1.5 minutes to Helmut Scholz.
Danke, Frau Präsidentin.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Vice President Šefčovič, and categorically thank you to Michel Barnier for still not having abandoned the negotiating table despite our fumbling through the British fog, whether the negotiations have come to a successful end or still continue, and for having stoically, patiently and with tactical nous sought a treaty that can at least act as a partnership on friendship, based on friendship, that offers a solid and resilient foundation for that. But what do the sovereign 27 member states expect? What do the citizens actually expect from us, the co-legislator, in view of the situation now upon us, that we simply tick off such a detailed agreement so quickly and give a green light for its entry into force, assuming that the right thing will have been negotiated? The expectations are great on the part of fishermen and agricultural workers, employees in industry and services, pensioners and students, and so many others. What does the final compromise look like? Are the benchmarks set down by the European Parliament for fair competition still effective even in the small print? Are there corresponding enforcement instruments? That applies above all to employment, social and environmental standards and governance. The ETUC was very clear about this, as were the environmental and farmers' associations. Yes, the deal must stand the test of time in the way that we've made benchmarks out of preserving the peace between the UK and Northern Ireland, acquired rights of citizens and a constructive blueprint for economic cooperation, benchmarks of the stance of the European Parliament in the Brexit process. Let's be honest, the loss of trust that's occurred and the mistrust citizens have in politics, both here and in Britain, goes far beyond any specific trade agreements and is enormous. Let's not harm democracy further. Let's take the time we need to scrutinise it, if there's anything to scrutinise. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. Now for 1 minute, Dorian Rockmarker.
Thank you very much, Chair. I could start a sob story about my grandson, who I love dearly and who lives in the UK, but I won't. Let's take the emotions out of the Brexit story and be rational. The Brits are leaving the EU, but they don't leave Europe. They will be our neighbours forever. Luckily, politicians can't change that, and wealthy neighbours are to be preferred above the poor ones. A Brexit deal is in the making. Only 2 issues left. The Brits want to rule their own waves. That's understandable. And there is the issue of the level playing field in arbitrage. It is the duty of politicians to solve problems instead of making them. Let's be creative. Think about leaseback constructions, licenses of fishery rights for European fishermen, or financial compensation schemes, a Brexit fund. Use your imagination. Make a deal, not an ambitious deal, but the best deal possible. Jobs are at stake here. Mr. Barnier and all EU leaders, the EU citizens are counting on you. Thank you.
Thank you. And now for 2 minutes, the floor goes to Gabriel Mato.